I'm Tony Robinson, Associate Professor and Chair at the University of Colorado, Denver, Political Science. It's okay.
Hi, my name is Shadana Dickerson Sultan. I am an enrolled member of the Oglala Lakota Nation. My Lakota name is Dokahiyawea, which is she who leads. I'm really honored to have that name given to me in a naming ceremony last year.
I'm born and raised in Denver, Colorado. I've been a stand-up comedian my entire adult life. I like all parts of this panel. I'm basically not here to answer your questions. I'm here to comment on the questions that you asked them.
I would like to comment on one thing, and that's to build on what you ended with, which is we can't count on demography. We can't be complacent about thinking things are going to change. I just want to respond to that in a different way. I actually think we do have to count on demography, but I don't think that's being complacent. I think what it's recognizing is that the groups out of which renewal are going to come from, the groups that are going to lead the way and reject racism, take pride, and reclaim government, I think a lot of what your work implies it is not really going to come from the white community. That is, the white community in no way is a dependable ally in leading the way in this way. You kind of document it yourself. White voters, one way of putting it, are pretty hopeless in American history. That's a blunt way of putting it, but that is suggested in this work. For decades, white voting patterns have remained the same, and they get worse and worse, actually, and that's kind of documented in the work as well. Obama would have lost his election, if demographics were what they were when Bill Clinton ran.
So I'd like to respond to that by disagreeing. I just don't think that's right. Look, 3 out of 5 whites voted for Mitt Romney, 2 out of 5 didn't. That's 40%. And I also think when we look at how race is working, racism has shifted remarkably. Whites, as a whole, and I'm talking 90+%, really are committed to not being racist. Right? That's part of the reason all of this poison is in code. It's not simply so that politicians can protect themselves from censure. It's because whites, if they knew that they were being racially manipulated, would reject it. Right? If a politician stood up and said, "Vote for me because I got your back, all you white people," that politician, that would be it. That politician would do. Nobody would vote for him. Now, if a politician stands up and says, "Vote for me because I'm going to crack down on crime, I'm going to slam the border on illegal aliens, and I'm going to protect you from Sharia," they win a lot of white votes, right? It's the same message, but that code is hiding it even from whites themselves. What that means is we can engage whites around race, saying to them, "We understand your commitment to be anti-racist is sincere. We value who you are. We understand why you're in pain. We understand the fact that you're in crisis. We understand that you're looking around for an explanation of what's gone wrong in your life. It's time for you to start thinking about the way in which race is damaging you and your prospects." Right? I genuinely believe that we can have a conversation with whites that shifts how a majority of whites think about themselves. I firmly believe that a majority of whites want to be a part of a multiracial society in which we take care of each other. But we have to have that conversation with them, frankly. We can't do it in this sort of colorblind, we'll all get past race if we just don't talk about it sort of way. That's the first point. Here's the second point. I don't think we have a choice. What does it mean to live in a racially stratified society? It means whites have the vast bulk of the power. For every dollar that the average white family has in wealth, the average African American family has a nickel. That's what it means to live in a racially stratified society. Power in this society is not numbers. It's money, it's political power, it's cultural status, it's who owns the corporations, it's who runs the governments, it's who sets the terms of the culture. That power is overwhelmingly in the hands of whites. And we cannot take it from them. We can't use that model. There will not be substantial progress in terms of race until most whites come to understand that it is in their interest to make that progress, right? So I just, again, I think it's possible to reach whites. And second, I don't think we have a choice. We must reach whites, or we will not have racial progress, we will have racial war. And that is not going to help anybody.
It seems that there are people willing to kill to hold on to the idea of whiteness. It's not simply a matter of convincing ideology. With that being the truth, how can you possibly convince a violently seized black community to hold on to the idea of America until said idea changes?
Because that's what the black community has done. Because that's one of the deep commitments of the black community, because what choices the black community have, right? So there are things about America that are deeply beautiful. There are things about America that are deeply ugly. We all find ourselves in the throes of both. In that context, race is one of the ugliest inventions this society has developed. But let's understand it for what it is. It is, I think, trivial on one level, right? All of this is made up. It's made up, right? And it's like skin color, hair, whatever, it's all made up, it doesn't matter. But from the inception of this country, race became a powerful tool that could be used to justify exploitation. It could be used to justify the exploitation of African American labor by the creation of a black race, by the concomitant creation of slavery. It could be used to justify the dispossession of Native Americans. How can you explain to yourself why it's okay to come to a new land and to set about systematically exterminating the people, right? Because Ben Franklin, one of his big insights is that smallpox could be spread through Native American populations with smallpox-infected blankets, and that would make it easier to take their land. How can you do that? How can you do that to others? You have to invent a story which says they don't feel pain the way I do, they don't experience love the way I do, they don't adore their children the way I do. There must be something wrong with them, they must be savage, they must be barbaric, they must be a different race, right? Race is the invention that allows the dispossession of Native Americans. Race is the invention that allows the United States to expand westward, to go to war with Mexico, and to take the northern half of that country, justified through manifest destiny. Race is what allows the United States to expand and create an empire in Asia. Now, you get a system like that going, and a couple things happen. One, wealth and power ends up distributed in terms of race. The suburbs, those nice wealthy suburbs, overwhelmingly white. CEOs, overwhelmingly white. Our politicians, overwhelmingly white. That's not an accident. That's a process of distributing and justifying exploitation in terms of race. At the same time, poverty, misery, suffering, overwhelmingly non-white. We built this into our system. That's the first thing that happens. The second thing that happens, once that's what your society looks like, then everybody reared into that society comes to understand at a sort of a common sense level that if you're white, you're right. And if you're black and brown, you're dangerous and you're dirty and your life isn't worth anything. And people will fight, people will kill to confirm the idea that they are decent, that they are superior. Right? We launched that system. What choice do we have as a society but to break it down? Right? And I think this is the core insight. And this is something that Martin Luther King would say over and over again. We built this. And because we built this ugly system, we are morally obligated to break it down. And we don't have a choice. That's what we must do. And it's not to deny its ugliness. It's not to deny its violence. It's to recognize and call out the ugliness and the violence and to say, We have no choice but to break this down. If we are to be a society, if we are to realize the fundamental aspirations of what it means to be just and inclusive, to be free, to honor liberty, to embody equality, we have no choice but to confront the ugliness in our society. We must do that.
If you have white folks who have this philosophical belief that they don't want to be racist, but at the same time they don't want to live in sketchy neighborhoods, and they want their property values to go up, how do you reconcile that reality with the reality, another contrived reality, that value equals absence of black and brown people?
I think that's a fantastic question and a really, really great insight. Part of what happened with the white working class and with the white middle class is that they experienced a sense of downward mobility to the extent that they could not escape integration. Right? So that for working class whites, as blacks moved into their schools, their neighborhoods, their workplaces, they didn't experience that as opening up their world. They experienced that as downward mobility. But it wasn't just symbolic, because what happened? Whites with the means to escape did escape, and sort of white flight to the suburbs. And as they fled to the suburbs, they took with them government resources. So that it's not just symbolic. The reality is, we as a society put more resources into largely segregated white spaces than we put into integrated spaces. And we have been doing that since the beginning of the 20th century. And certainly through the New Deal. You all understand that the sort of Federal Housing Authority did it explicitly in the sense that it would only issue mortgages to areas that were homogeneously white, they were racially mixed, no mortgages. But we've been doing that also since the 70s and onward. How do we confront that? I think we confront it by naming it, by talking first to the whites who cannot escape integration, and by helping them rethink what integration means, by convincing them that they really are in the same boat with people of color, and that they will get nothing from government unless they can make demands for government that incidentally does help people of color. Right? That's where we start.
You said at the end of your presentation that I think 93% of Americans identify tolerance as like a key value. But at the same time, a lot of your presentation was about how the way people act and the way people vote is really divisive, and specifically racially divisive. So how do you think we get to a place where people don't feel that saying they're tolerant is enough, and people feel obligated to act tolerant?
Great question.
2 minutes to answer.
Having said that, he's trying to cut me off, man.
We do control the audio.
That's how we draw that comment. Okay, so here's the thing. What I'm saying is we need a new frame, we need a new story, and as people have a new story about what's happening in their lives, then the only story out there is the one that's being provided by conservatives and echoed by the Democrats. That what's happening in people's lives is that there's too many minorities and the government's just giving things away to them. We need a new story, a story that says, hey, we're all in this together. We refuse to be divided by race, by gender, by sexual orientation. There are people who are threatening in their lives, and those are the selfish rich. And it's not that they're necessarily bad people, but people like the Koch brothers, they give a lot of money to cancer research, to art. I got it. They're good people in one sense, but in another, they think that what's good for them is good for the rest of us. And when they have that much power and their wealth depends on the petrochemical industry and they refuse to believe in global warming, what's good for them is bad for the rest of us. And we need a story that says the selfish rich have used race and other cultural war issues to divide us in a way that is harming society and the impacts are measurable. Now, I want to say very quickly, one thing that hasn't come out as much In my talk, I really emphasize the sort of black-white dynamic, and that's appropriate with dogwist politics because that's where it comes from. But I want to be clear, especially after 2001, it's not just black-white. After 2001, it allows politicians to create two new rhetorics. The rhetoric of the Arab Muslim as this terrorist threat, not just abroad but domestically. And this is Kansas passing a law that says our courts will not enact Sharia. It's like, because they were about to, I guess. Right? But this is Kansas saying domestic threat. That's one. The other one, undocumented immigrants presented as illegal aliens, as this brown tide surging northward from Mexico that's going to overwhelm the United States and change it and fracture it. Let me tell you, in some ways, the rhetoric of Arab Muslim terrorists and illegal aliens is now supplanting the rhetoric of fear around blacks. And especially in 2016, I think, this whole rhetoric of illegal aliens is probably going to be the predominant dog whistle. So I really want us to think, this sort of politics continually evolves, and there are new targets all the time. And so it's incumbent on us to create this sense of togetherness, this sense of shared belonging, this sense of purpose in retaking our government, but also to really understand this is togetherness, reaching out beyond just blacks, beyond just Latinos, beyond just Arab Muslims, reaching out beyond race to include gender, to include class, to include disability, to include citizenship. This is really a project in which we say we are going to confront the main hierarchies in our lives and refuse to be defined or divided by them as we come together and see that the real threat in our lives is the very rich.
Okay.